Okay, so continuing where we left off on the last video, the early anthropoids appear in the Eocene, ancestral anthropoids appear in the Eocene, and then in the Oligocene they start to diversify and spread across the Old World. We also, at the end of the Oligocene, beginning of the Miocene, start to see primates appearing in the New World. So the very earliest primate, or the very earliest monkey species that has been found, the earliest fossil monkey species that's been found in the New World, dates to about 26 million years ago. It's a genus called Branicella in what is today Bolivia. So, as I mentioned before, the very earliest primate-like animals, the plesiadapiforms, seem to have evolved in North America. Now, after a certain point, after a few million years, they seem to disappear from North America. So it seems that they somehow managed to migrate into the Old World, into Europe, Eurasia, and Africa, and then continue their evolutionary trajectories in that part of the world. Now, after 26, we have anthropoids in the form of New World monkeys back in the New World. So we have them primarily occupying South America and parts of Central America. So the map that you're looking here is showing potential routes for how New World monkeys arrived in South America. We don't know exactly how this happened. We can speculate a little bit. One of the best, most widely accepted ideas is basically that they floated over on a vegetation raft. So this probably doesn't sound very likely to some of you. You might be a little bit skeptical of this, but this is a process that's actually been observed in nature by scientists today. So basically what happens is that this can happen in rivers, and it can happen in the oceans as well, but you can have these accumulations of vegetation, falling trees, clumps of, weeds and other types of vegetation that kind of form these large rafts. Now, if this happens in a lake, or I mean a river rather, they will kind of accumulate and grow as they travel down the river towards the ocean. Sometimes these vegetation rafts can actually become detached, can float out off into the ocean, and travel by being carried by the currents. Some of these vegetation rafts can be quite large enough to carry various life forms. Small animals can kind of hitch a ride on these vegetation rafts and end up in weird places. As I said, this has been observed to happen in nature. This isn't speculative. So something that's been speculated to have happened with New World monkeys is that they originated in Africa. They do seem to have originated in Africa. The fossil evidence supports that idea. The most likely scenario is that one of these vegetation rafts carried some of these monkeys across the Atlantic Ocean, and that is how they arrived in the New World. Now, this isn't as unlikely as you might think it is for a couple of reasons. One of which is that, as we talked about in the last video, the continents were actually in different places during this time period. So South America and Africa were about 30% closer during this time period than they are today. So the distance that this raft would have had to have traveled carrying these monkeys is significantly shorter than it would be in modern times. The other thing to keep in mind is that the North and South America were not actually connected at the time. So there was open and free exchange of currents at this location where we now have a connecting landmass. So basically the ocean currents were totally different at that point in history than they are today. Indications and modeling show that these currents would have been quite strong, sort of pushing in the direction from Africa towards South America. So not only would there have been a shorter distance to travel, but the currents would have been moving at a much quicker pace as well. So basically this vegetation raft idea is not as unlikely as it may seem. Now, a direct route from Africa to South America is the easiest scenario, the simplest scenario, but there could potentially have been other routes as well. So that's what's being shown on this map with all of these different paths. Some of them really aren't very well supported by fossil evidence. For example, this red route here going from modern day Europe into North America and south from there isn't really supported from the fossil record because it's not supported by the fossil record because we don't actually see monkey species in this part of North America. So we have that early occupation of North America by the Plesiadapiforms, and then primates disappear from the region. So if we saw this as a migration route, if this was the actual migration route, we would expect to find some evidence of these monkeys living in North America at some time and at some point prior to arriving in South America, and we just don't see that. Same thing goes for these other routes, like this green route here. We don't have any evidence of primates ever living in Australia or in Antarctica either, for that matter. So this direct route, this shortest route from the West Africa over to South America, is the most likely scenario. Now, back in Africa, we start to see the divergence of among the catarrhines. So the catarrhines are the Old World monkeys and apes. In the Oligocene, moving into the Miocene is when we start to see the emergence of the apes. There's some listed differences there between an Old World monkey and an ape. We won't go over them. You can do that on your own and look through some of the materials in the book. But basically, what we're looking at here are size differences. Apes tend to be larger and have larger, more highly encephalized brains. They have slightly different body proportions, shorter torsos, longer arms, shorter legs, etc., etc. The primary thing here to remember, as we talked about earlier in the semester, the easiest way to tell whether you're looking at a monkey or an ape is the tail. Does it have a tail? Does it not have a tail? Monkeys have monkeys have tails and apes do not. So that's the easiest way to tell the difference. Early apes we have appearing at the tail end of the Oligocene. And then, of course, into the Miocene, we see a lot of divergence within that category. We see the earliest ape-like animals in Africa dating to about 27. We have plenty of evidence of what they were eating. Lots of studies have looked at their tooth morphology and have done isotopic analysis on their teeth and have determined that these apes were primarily fruit eaters, that they lived in a variety of different types of environments, from rainforests to open woodlands, and that there was a ton of variation in body size. So you're not reading that wrong. That's not a typo. Anywhere from 10 pounds up to 150 pounds is the range of body size here. Modern Y5 dental pattern, that's the morphology of the molars that apes have in modern times, that appears during this time period. And we have the disappearance of the tail. So there are some early ape-like fossils that appear to have kind of shortened tails, but it's not until this time period when we start to see the tail completely gone. Okay, so back to this slide, we've kind of very quickly gone over a history of primate evolution during the early part of the Cenozoic. We've gotten to this point in the Miocene when monkeys and apes emerge and diversify. And then, of course, as I said, as we get to the tail end of the Miocene, we start to see further divergence in the ape lineage, and we start to see our own direct ancestors emerge as a distinct lineage as well. So 6 to 7 million years ago is when we see that divergence between our lineage and the lineage of modern day chimpanzees.